My guest today is Winnie M Li. She is an author and activist. Her debut novel, Dark Chapter, is a fictional retelling of her real-life stranger rape in Belfast, from victim and perpetrator perspectives. Translated now into 10 languages, it won The Guardian's Not the Booker Prize and was nominated for an Edgar Award and the Best First Novel Award. She is currently adapting it for the screen. Her second novel, Complicit, was published in summer 2022 and selected by the New York Times for their August book club. Winnie is also the founder of Clear Lines, the UK's first ever festival addressing sexual assault and consent through the arts and discussion. Her PhD research at the London School of Economics explores media engagement by rape survivors as a form of activism. She holds an honorary doctorate from the National University of Ireland in recognition of her writing and activism. So welcome to the show, Winnie. Lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, it's the end of the summer, sadly, but that is life. And looking forward to the autumn.
Great. So because the show is called Unbroken, the first question I ask all of my guests is, what does the word unbroken mean to you?
So I guess for me it means being able to retain the essence of who you are, despite everything that gets thrown at you in life and despite everything that you have to go through sometimes. Yeah, so for me, I guess when I think about my immediately after my trauma, I felt like I was never going to go back to being the person I was before, and all the joy in the world and all the skills I had suddenly vanished. And I think that was in some ways the hugest sense of loss for me. But then a few years on, I realized I was able to actually do those things I had done before. And if anything, I was, had a new perspective on life, and maybe a more measured one. And so I suppose in that sense, like even though I had felt broken before, I realized that because I had still, at the end of it, I was still me, I was still the Winnie I was before the rape, then that actually meant I was sort of unbroken in in a certain way.
I love it, and it's actually the words that you're saying could even come out of my mouth. I always say that the true essence of who I am, can never be taken away. They can never touch that or destroy that. So we actually met because we're both sexual violence activists. We met through our friend Imogen, I believe, when we went to see her play many years ago, and I've followed your path over the years and just blown away by your persistence and your determination to make changes for survivors. Why is it so important to you?
So it's interesting because for me, I was 29 when my rape happened. So, like any girl growing up, then woman, you're aware of the fact that there's something rape called a rape that's out there, and it's a bad thing, and you don't want it to happen to you. But I'd never actually considered it as something that could be part of my own reality. So I happily went through 29 years of my life, traveling a lot, often on my own, leading a pretty adventurous life, thinking I was not, I suppose, immune to that kind of violence, or thinking that was just completely off my radar. And then, one day I went for a walk in the park in Belfast, and I was followed by a stranger, and I was raped. And kind of from that moment on, my life was fundamentally changed, as it would be, for any victim or any survivor. That was the worst period of my life, having to wait for the trial, thinking that I was going to have to fly back to Belfast one day and sit in a courtroom in front of him and tell my side of the story in public, effectively, right, in a very kind of antagonistic atmosphere, which is what a courtroom is, for a victim. So yeah, so that was months of dreading that. And then at the last minute, so I flew there, and at the last minute, the morning of the trial, while the jury was being selected, my barristers came in and said, well, there's actually been a change, and he's decided to plead guilty,
Which mean you didn't need
which he
to
could
go
have
to
done at
trial.
any given point. Yeah, so I didn't have to go to trial. He could have also done that at any given point prior to then, because that was like a whole year effectively
Mhm.
after the assault. And I just remember being so much in shock, thinking like, I don't, wait, what? Like, so he's actually going to plead guilty, so that means I don't have to testify, right? And they're like, yeah, and I'm like, oh, well, yeah, I'm okay with that, right? Like, what are you going to say, right? I was in so much shock because at that sudden twist of events, right? So in some ways, I never got that trial, which is
Did you
fine.
want your day in court? Did you want to stand there and say what had happened, or you were quite
No,
relieved?
No, I was relieved. I mean, more than anything, I was relieved. But it was so jarring to be dreading something, anticipating something for months, and suddenly to be told, actually, it's not going to happen, and everything's fine, right? As fine as it could be. So it was really quite. So I was relieved. My friends were like jumping up and down with victory, but I was just like, well, I can't. I mean, yeah, I'm relieved. I don't have to testify, but like, I'm still a rape victim here, right? I still had to, still have to deal with everything that was inflicted upon me and the aftermath. So yeah, so I was relieved, but at the part of me at the back of my head was thinking like, okay, well, what would a trial have been like, right? And like, I am quite glad I didn't have to do it, but I'm conscious of the fact that many other victims have had to do that in the name of justice, sit through a trial and testify in front of their perpetrator. So I wrote that into the novel, basically, and I decided, okay, well, I'm going to do a lot of research, and I spoke to barristers, I spoke to the Public Prosecution Service, sat in on a number of rape trials, just so I could try to like recreate what the trial could have gone like, right? And I wanted to show how cruel the criminal justice system can be to a victim. So my career ended because of the rape, and like as I said, it was a stranger who raped me, but I didn't, I wasn't able. I had PTSD and trauma and everything, so I couldn't actually perform my demanding job, right?
Well, it's not a
So
very nurturing or welcoming environment anyway. You've got to be in a good place. So I can imagine when you're feeling like that, you
yeah,
couldn't cope. Impossible.
yeah, exactly. So and it was interesting because for a while, for a few months, I did try to like keep on doing what I was doing before as a film producer, and then I'm like, I just can't do this. So and then when I was able to work again, so I basically kind of just threw myself into whatever you have to do for the criminal justice process. And then even after my rapist was convicted, I then felt even more depressed because I was like, oh, actually, I've done everything. Like I haven't won, but like, like justice has won out in this situation, and I've done everything I'm supposed to have done as a victim, but like my life is still shit, right? And I don't have a job. And I couldn't go back to my work because that job, the company had restructured and this and that, right? And then, so essentially, how do you get a job in film after that? Well, you have to network your way to a job because it's not like there's that many posts don't get advertised in the film world, or if they do, you're never going to get them unless you know somebody in the company. So I just didn't have it in me to be networking a year after my rape, and trying to make up an excuse for why I hadn't worked for the past year. Because you can't say in a job interview, oh, I was violently raped by a stranger, right? And that's why I wasn't working. Because then they're going to think, oh, maybe she's not capable of her job anymore, which is incredibly unjust, right? So I kind of lost my whole career as a film producer. And there is sadness about that. And am I bitter? Probably I'm not bitter about it, but I am sad, and I miss the fact that I used to go to the Cannes Film Festival for my job, and I used to be able to go to screenings and lead that kind of really exciting life of putting a film together. So I think I was channeling that when I was writing Complicit, in terms of, okay, here's a 39-year-old woman, Sarah's 39 when the novel opens, who is bitter about having lost her job and sad about no longer being in that industry. So I was channeling some of that. But in the meantime, 10 years had passed, and I had become much more aware of not just sexual violence, but general misogyny in our society. So I'd realized that, oh no, the industry is an incredibly misogynistic place. And you have this image of glamour and and luxury, but behind it, there is all this inequality, there's all this injustice. And I kind of wanted to write a book that showed that, I suppose.
Well, it definitely does. Has the writing been a healing process for you with both of the books? Has that helped you on your journey to healing?
Um, don't know if I would say that. I mean, with Dark Chapter, I definitely had to recover to a point where I was able to write it.
Hmm.
I mean, I was writing all the time anyway because I am a writer, and writing is what I do to kind of make sense of the world and life and stuff. So, with Dark Chapter, I came up with the idea for actually just a few weeks after the assault, but it was just stayed at the back of my head, and I'm like, okay, I'm in no state in my in my life to be able to write a novel. So I waited about 5.5 years to write that. And by that point, I'd found a different career, and I was earning a decent salary. And again, I made a deliberate decision to leave that career track, where I would probably be earning more money these days, right? To write that book I always wanted. So in that sense, I felt like I had done a fair amount of healing before I started writing Dark Chapter. And writing Dark Chapter allowed me to put a lot of questions to rest, and it allowed me to, I guess, transform a pretty dark episode in my life into a book that has connected with people. So that is positive.
Well,
Has it enabled
even
me?
the chapter is brilliant because I think we all have dark chapters, whether it's about sexual violence or not. We all have a dark chapter within us that maybe we don't want to look at or don't want to touch. But actually, at the end of the day, it's working these dark chapters is what heals us, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I guess when I finally wrote that book and it got published and I started, being able to establish a career as an author, like that was the beginning of a new chapter, a bright chapter. So I guess you can call that, yeah, I imagine that's healing.